March 11th, mostly sunny. I feel the memories of nearly 20 years in this valley. Years of joy, pain, doubts, and reassurance. Love in a new way, so strong, so lasting. Few have lived as we have here. So yes, my darling, I'm lonely for you. Nothing calms me as your true and steady hand. Come home to your wife.
Douglas Tompkins died Tuesday in an accident in Chile. He was a passionate conservationist.
Se enamoró de la Patagonia en su juventud, en los años 60. Volvió para comprar esos terrenos en los 90.
25 años los vivió aquí en Chile y aquí deja como legado la obra filantrópica más grande del mundo.
Tompkins fue un tipo muy visionario, construyó un proyecto en épocas muy duras donde en el fondo los ecologistas eran vistos como ecoterroristas.
I mean, Doug was a big personality. He dies suddenly. Everybody thinks they didn't know what to think. Would I fall apart? If I fell apart, the game was over. We would lose 25 years of our work. People had no idea if I was going to come back or not. I'd lost the love of my life. I was seriously wounded on my knees. I get a note from a friend who says, you have to make a choice and you have to make it right now. You can live off this story. You can tell everybody about this life you had and mourn Doug for the rest of your life. Or you can go to work and don't stop. What are you gonna do? And that was a choice.
Multi-skill model.
She's kidding, wasn't she?
Yeah, we hope so. Big she was. So I got these are from K2. No way. What?
What year is that, Rick?
78.
Rick's gonna drag us up the mountain. So I brought you a different axe. It's a lot lighter. Or, I mean, I brought mini axes for myself and Pablo.
So this is it?
Or you could take one of these, which is...
I think I'd rather have the long one.
Okay.
Time to go.
After Doug had passed, Rick called me and asked if I wanted to join him and Chris on a climbing trip. You know, he told me that Chris really wanted to go and climb that mountain. I just thought, yeah, that makes sense. I could see why. It's a really special mountain.
Oh, hey, there's our mountain.
No, really. I'm sorry, but... Oh my God, look at that.
Mira, ¿viste? Tiene un poquito de nieve.
Poquito.
Pero poquito.
Dame un par más de chihuas.
This is the farthest I've been inside this park. We never saw this. I mean, we fly a lot, but we never got on the ground enough. We didn't really explore. We just worked. This is a real wake-up call for me. In the very beginning, Doug and I were living in the middle of this paradise. And we said, it would be incredible to save this place. Just save it. Because of climate and all these other things. Right now, on any scorecard, nature is losing. What can you do today to try to save the critical areas of the planet?
What was your vision? What did you come here for?
We sort of started to make a master plan and started to realize it was possible to create a national park under a private initiative.
The idea that we would donate it back to the country.
The ultimate do-it-yourself approach to saving the Earth, buying it.
Tompkins and his wife, Chris, have assembled land for conservation on a scale never seen before.
And this is like the size of Yosemite National Park here. So that volcano over there, you bought that? Yeah, that came with it.
Some people here began asking just what were these Americans really up to?
A nuestro juicio, no es más que un simple comerciante con antifaz de ecologista.
I think in Chile, many people did not understand at the beginning what being an ecologist meant. Some people wanted it to be a place to invest to produce energy with the rivers. Some other wanted to cut the forest.
We didn't know there were stakes. That was part of the problem.
The former president of Chile has accused your husband of throwing people off the land. It has been reported that you also have gotten death threats.
We had death threats for years, the phones tapped. No, there were huge stakes. For 25 years, I really put shoulder to the wheel and did everything to make what Doug wanted to do possible. This is what you were talking about this morning, is all of this.
See, I undermined that a long time ago because somebody told me that place was for sale. I came down to Chile in 1990, bought a house and was fixing it up. You know, we bought a piece of land, not with the idea of making a large park, but then another piece became available, and then a very big piece became available, and pretty soon we had the makings of a park.
Por un lado tenías a un loco soñador con un proyecto fantástico de un parque, y por el otro lado tenías a una persona que llevaba esto a una realidad nacional.
She says, I want to fly with you a bit, but don't fall. Don't crash. Don't crash.
There was a deep, deep union and devotion to each other. They came together with a common vision and they fought like cats in a bag.
We can bicker with each other.
No, I think a desire to work against the trend of the destruction of wild nature. I think that is as big a bond and strong a bond as any two people can have.
You don't mind, like, taking a little break here or up there?
No, up at the edge of the forest?
Yeah.
Agreed,
Like
yeah.
another
Sure.
200, 300 feet.
Yeah, sounds good.
How you doing, Chris?
I'm okay.
Good.
I always said I want to live at one end of the spectrum or the other, but never in the middle. And before I died, I wanted this life. I didn't know what this was, but I knew I wanted something wild, outrageous, risky in the sense of changing everything that was so comfortable. Doug would be so happy for me and proud of me to walk up there and see what the highest place in the park looks like. For me, this is a way to say a final goodbye to him. Doug made the first ascent of this mountain back in 2008. He was a climber, and it was always his first love. Doug grew up in the Northeast. He started climbing in the Gunks when he was in middle school. He had no interest in school, never went to college. He found it a worthless way to spend your life, conforming. He just rejected all of it and left
My distraction.
at 17.
They'd like to keep
Drove
me
west.
far from my home.
I don't think he had no money. He had no idea what he would do out there, what he would find.
Sweet whiskey, stop to say hello.
Doug eventually ended up in Yosemite and climbing in the valley and stuff. And I climbed with him there. We became just really good friends.
Years later, it was Yvonne who eventually brought Doug and me together.
Doug and Yvonne were best friends and lifelong climbing partners. They were both world-class climbers. I mean, these were the original dirtbag climbers and surfers and skiers who go on to create the outdoor clothing business as we know it.
Doug really looked up to Yvonne. And that relationship changed over the 50 years. And Yvonne really listened to Doug when they entered into their business lives.
Somehow he talked himself into getting the franchise for a hot dog stand in Yosemite. And he ran the hot dog stand and climbed. He was an entrepreneur, and if you want to understand the entrepreneur, study the juvenile delinquent. Because they're saying, this sucks, I'm going to do it my own way. And, you know, Doug became a businessman before anybody else. I mean, I was a blacksmith, and I was making climbing gear, but I didn't consider myself a businessman till way later. I was climbing 6 months a year, and I started making climbing gear. I was growing the business in all the normal ways, but we had a lot of different ideas. And so we had the policy of basically work when you have to work and play when you have to play. And when the surf comes up, take off, go surfing. And that's when I met Chris.
Well, East Coast girls are hip by really do those styles they wear. And the Southern girls with the way they talk, they make the out there or down there. The Midwest farmer's daughters really make you feel.
She was a surfer girl, you know, never wore shoes. In fact, when she was in high school, she'd go to school barefooted, and the teacher would go pretty crazy. She was a little juvenile delinquent herself.
Chris was Yvonne's next-door neighbor. She was probably 15 or 16 when I first met her. She was extraordinarily friendly. She loves to talk. She loves to do things, but she's very meticulous.
We grew up on our great-grandfather's ranch in California. When I was 8, my father and his oil company decided to go to Venezuela, a little hamlet in the Orinoco Basin. My father became very ill one afternoon, and he was dead 5 days later of bulbar polio. After our father died, our mother remarried to our really close family friend. And he was a real go-getter, and he had 4 kids. So there were 7 of us, and we were called the hooligans. We were wild. My father wanted his kids to be the ones who'd fling themselves off the high diving board. nothing was impossible. And I was the one who responded to all of that. The thing that was asked of us was be great at what you do. I don't care what it is, but be great at it. I refused to go to private school, but the local high school was such a bad high school that I started going to the beach and hanging out with an older brother and Yvon Chouinard. This is when I'm 15 years old. He was absolutely clear about who he was. On the other hand, I am much more like a pebble in a stream, and it just kind of knocks along, gets moved down river, and I get hooked on one rock, and then maybe a little current takes me out and keeps me going. Anyway, I came home from my first year at college, and my mother sat me down and said, "You have to get a job." So I went to Yvon, and I was complaining, and he hired me for the summer for $2 an hour.
So she started working for me as an assistant packer. Assistant packer, that's as low as you can get. Just kind of worked our way up the company, and we slowly learned how to run a business together. Doug had started his own business as well.
They started a guide service, California Mountaineering Guide Service it was called. And that became the reason that I started the North Face. I needed equipment to supply the clients to the guide service.
It was about this time that Doug met Susie.
My first wife, Susie, I met hitchhiking. She picked me up hitchhiking.
One day I'm driving in an area called Emerald Bay in Lake Tahoe, and there's this guy hitchhiking, so I stopped and picked him up, and he had ropes and he had all his climbing gear. He was so arrogant. I just remember thinking, what a jerk this guy is, but there's something kind of cool too. Eventually we got married. We lived in North Beach in San Francisco. When we opened the North Face, we invited this group called the Grateful Dead to play at our opening. Doug had a great time building it out, and it was really beautiful.
He created this unique environment to sell a different kind of clothing and climbing equipment.
The North Face kept growing, and then Doug got very restless because he wanted to go away and go climbing and not be tied down. And so we sold it.
At that time, Susie had started Esprit. She was in partnership with another woman.
We'd been out selling off of these very, very amateur samples we had made. And so I remembered showing him the orders. Doug just looked at it and kind of shook his head and was like, wow, there's an opportunity. We were in business. So then Esprit became a big label, and then we took off.
Really built the Esprit company up. Eventually expanded internationally with a lot of partners all around the world, from Asia to Australia to Europe.
We're here in the middle of what will hopefully become Patagonia National Park. But what's going to happen to this? It's one thing to have a big idea, but it's quite another thing to be able to realize it. And that's where it takes working really closely with the government. This park is one of 5 new parks. In every case, we've bought significant territory and proposed to the government to partner with us and contribute additional federal lands.
Toda la reserva a la Colufe puede ser fácilmente un parque nacional y no perder ninguna oportunidad productiva.
It would be so wonderful if all these projects were ever to actually become fledged national parks. Being convinced that that was actually going to happen was another thing.
Chile has been a country totally based on extractive economy. It is said that mining is the salary of Chile. It is more than 60% of our exports. Today, Chile is the world's largest copper producer and the second largest lithium producer.
Chile es un país minero. Es una economía extractiva. La minería es contaminante.
The politicians' economical sense was to exploit those lands and the forests. So, the people that were at the government at the time didn't get the idea of a park.
In Latin America, there's no history of land philanthropy. So here comes this wacko American, goes down there and he says, I'm gonna buy up all this land in Chile and I'm gonna make parks and I'm gonna give it back to the people. And they're going, come on, nobody does that. No, there's gotta be another reason.
Doug started coming down here in 1961. He was ski racing, and all ski racers trained in the off-season. So that's how he began to understand what Argentina and Chile were like, and he really liked it from the beginning. So he had this love affair with Patagonia.
It was his idea to go down to Patagonia. So we took off 2 weeks later. We bought an old van, filled it up with skis and surfboards and climbing gear. Driving, I don't know, 10,000, 12,000 miles or whatever it is. It was a great adventure.
Super legendary trip. I mean, they defined an entire era. They defined an entire way of life. Climbing, surfing, skiing unskied peaks, and eventually climbing one of the most difficult and significant first ascents of their time.
We spent 60 days trying to climb Fitzroy. We spent 31 days in an ice cave. I think we had 5 days where you had climbable weather.
I was gone for, 9 months. Ivan Chenard, an old friend of mine, and 3 other friends. We were in Chile a very long time.
We fell in love with Patagonia, the area. That was my first time in Patagonia. It was like the American West of 100 years ago, but it was authentic. So that trip was long enough so that it transformed our lives.
When Yvonne came down to Patagonia, the place in 1968 with Doug Tompkins to climb Fitzroy, it was wild. And then we went back exactly 20 years later, and it was different.
Look at this. They got the streets all laid out and everything.
Be opening a McDonald's and a Wimpy's.
The developers had laid out the grid and put up the street signs for what became the city of Chaltén. We also began to notice, way back a long time ago, that things were warming up. We became aware that the glaciers were starting to retreat. We started to learn more about climate change. And Doug was like the first guy to really sense that.
And I think it was a dual aspect of his voracious reading and his being introduced to certain people who led him to other books.
He got very much involved with deep ecology, and And it was a natural fit because all these deep ecologists were all climbers. They saw nature being destroyed. And if we destroy nature, we destroy ourselves.
Deep ecology is simply looking at all life as being interconnected. All life has intrinsic value. It is not reliant on humans placing value on it.
After being down in Patagonia, I thought, I want to make clothing for the conditions down there.
Yvonne said, I want to make some jackets. I want to call it Patagonia.
Patagonia, it's one of those magical names. And the label that we came up with, it's got that skyline of Fitzroy.
For one reason or another, he said to me, you should take this on. I ended up creating it, running it, growing it.
Yvon has lots and lots of ideas, but he doesn't know how to get there. And Chris could do it. And she also didn't do the bad ideas. That's the important part.
She was driven and very confident. Eventually, she was our CEO and general manager.
Once Patagonia got going, it was, especially for its day, really a freight train. And then in the early 80s, Yvonne decided that we should take Patagonia and turn it into an activist company.
I was building my business and I was getting concerned about the environment. I felt like I was going to push my business to be more and more responsible. But Doug didn't do that. He was strictly building it as big as he possibly could.
Okay, Fred Astaire, go ahead.
Tompkins is not a fashion designer. The Esprit look is created by his wife, Susie. But everything else having to do with the company's image and communicating it to the public, he oversees himself.
Oh yeah, she's great. Julie Hall. Yeah, definitely.
Esprit had its own apartment in Milano. Esprit had an apartment in Paris. Esprit had an apartment in New York City and Tokyo. You'd walk into the house, there'd be a Francis Bacon triptych worth $5 million sitting above the fireplace. The heyday of Esprit was when he was totally devoted and totally into being the worldwide entrepreneur of a fashion mega business. And then there was the change.
I think it really changed a lot. I just, passed through that gate somewhere towards the end of the late 80s, and I just said, I've got to do something else.
I think he felt lost. He was lost by his own hand.
First order of business in the fashion industry is to create the sense of desire that you needed new things. And I started to realize I shouldn't be doing that because I was just adding to the destruction of the world.
So the latter years of Esprit, their catalogs and the copy in them is trying to talk you out of buying the clothes.
I mean, you can't do that and still, try to figure out how you're going to pay everybody and move your company forward. In the early 90s, I just couldn't take it anymore. And the company was struggling, and I had to just make a decision that I had to try to save Esprit.
He and Susie had split, and they had to split the company as well. She bought him out, and it was because he was interested in heading in new directions. got to go back to where he was, the last time he was really happy probably, which was Patagonia.
I think it was a big transition, but one that was important to him. He was the same guy, but a different guy. I think a more interesting guy, actually.
Moving to South America to commit to a project that seemed like a dream of some sort, because that was his mantra, commit and then figure it out. And that's exactly what he did. He committed everything he had.
He didn't come here with a plan. When he came to Chile, he just wanted to get out of the spree business. And being a pilot, he realized that all the farms were owned by absentee owners. We bought, you know, little farms from small farmers that they wanted to move on. Doug bought that 800-hectare farm, Reñihue.
Well, right actually where we're sitting right now, I lived here for 1.5 years, just right here. This was the living room and the kitchen, the dining room. Well, I fixed up the old main house across the way, and it was, you know, no electricity, although we have 10 feet by 8 feet, or 12 feet by 8 feet. It'd be,
yeah,
you know,
whatever
that is. You can't have. We've got 2 bedrooms. This is a 2-bedroom house.
He had a body of money. It wasn't billionaire money. It was a chunk, a big chunk, like 150 million. And he could do a thing. And he chose a thing.
Our first approach was to protect that land, but in those areas where there was the possibility, was to build demonstrative farms. Farms where we could show ourselves, first of all, and then the rest of the people, that maybe it was possible to live in this area, not cutting the trees, that wasn't your only choice of living there. Mm-hmm. So we started in the farms. We planted berries, developed honey, and we made jams, and we had the sheep, and we got the wool, and with the wool we created a network of handcraft. Was that profitable? No, it wasn't. You know, every time we sold a jar of honey, we gave you $5. Doug used to say that. But he said he could do that. He could choose to be ecologically sustainable and maybe not economically sustainable. And we had the chance to provide work for many people.
He used to rag on me in that I should sell my company and do the same thing he's doing. That he's doing the right thing and I'm doing the wrong thing. And I wanted to run my company in a responsible way, hanging on to my company and using it as a tool. To do that, I said, okay, we got to reassess what we're doing here. Our new mission statement is we're in business to save our home planet. And so I took a dozen of our top people of the company and went down to Patagonia. And that's when Doug met Chris at that same trip.
We were in Calafate, which was then a really tiny town. We were in this restaurant, and in walks Doug Tompkins. And he comes over and he plunks himself down next to me and says, boom, hey kid, how you doing? And then he says, this is classic Doug. He said, what are you doing? I said, well, we're leaving tomorrow morning. Why are you leaving? This is the end of this trip. Yeah, but why? Why don't you stay? In fact, why don't you stay and I'll fly you back to the United States? So I just said, no, and don't ask me again, I'm not going to fly. And then he started calling me from San Francisco once I was back and he was back. Well, what are you doing? well, I was involved with someone else, but I knew that that was cascading. And he's pretty charming. He was very charming.
Doug called me up and said, hey, you know that friend of yours, Chris? She's a good buddy of yours, right? And I go, oh yeah, she's one of my closest friends. She's godmother to all 3 of my children. And he goes, yeah, what do you think of her? So I told him how great she was. And then literally the same day, Chris calls me up and goes, hey, that guy, friend of Yvonne's, Doug Tompkins, you've been climbing with him for a while now. Yeah? What kind of guy is he? Do you know him very well? And I went, oh.
I know my wife, when she heard that Doug was interested in Chris, going, oh my God, that's a disaster. Because she knew how he had treated women in the past.
Doug was a wild, young bon vivant with many liaisons, and when Chris was talking to people about, is this a good thing, and people who knew Doug said, no, Doug's changed, no, this is going to be good, Doug's changing. And other women were going, oh man, you don't want to get in here, this is crazy.
There was a part of Doug that was like an ass, so we were a little bit nervous.
I started working with Yvonne. I was so young. I think 23 years of that, I just thought, I don't want to do this anymore. I was done. I was done with my life. Most people think of it when I say those things that I'm always talking about Patagonia. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about me. My life was over. I had to change it. I just thought there has to be something else out there, something bigger. Doug would call me from time to time, and one night I said, well, I'm going to go to Paris to work out at the Paris office, and he goes, great, I'll see you over there. And true to his form, he's in Paris. We go out to dinner, his favorite restaurant in Paris, and we're walking around, all around Paris. He said, come see me in Chile. I said, no, absolutely not. You're a world famous sandbagger. And he stopped and looked down at his feet and then looked back up at me and said, I will never let anything happen to you. It was one of those moments that you see somebody transform even in their own mind. I mean, much later he said he knew exactly, that was it. And so did I. I thought to myself, that's the man I was supposed to marry. But it was crazy, really crazy. I was engaged to another person. So I ended up leaving that fiancé. Then I went down to Chile to visit with Doug for 10 days, and I stayed 5 weeks. It was chemistry. When you get hit by lightning. I'm going to leave my role as CEO, and we are currently looking for someone to replace me. My hope is to have someone in place by October, train them, have them shadow me day to day for 3 months, and then January 1st, I bug out and likely go to Chile, which is where I'm thinking that my home will be. I mean, I blew up my whole, it was scandalous. I just blew up my personal life. But I was right. It turned out to be the great thing, and it was a big leap of faith. I mean, could easily have gone either way. This was insane, what we were doing.
Doug, dogs in my first date.
I just remember thinking, oh God, what have I done? And this farm, where we're headed now, was absolutely cut off. April 4th, 1994. Incredible property Doug has here. Entire peninsula, beautiful glaciers, waterfalls, rivers. April 5th, 1994. Ice on our sleeping bags in the morning. Incredibly clear and beautiful. We head south through Coyway forests, sleep at Hotel Nires, no dinner, and snuggle to sleep. May 20th, storm now at fourth day, no let up. Water being pushed into the house for force of the winds. Up at 2 a.m. to tie down the chimney and kill a giant rat. No chance of leaving.
There were no telephones, no way to get in and no way to get out, so she was isolated with Doug.
We're in our 40s, and we want to do all of these things, and they're big and they're difficult, and there's not a lot of history out there of other people doing them, so you're sort of making it up as you go along. And it was a new marriage. You just hope that the fibers of that marriage can withstand the pressures of working together, living together in these intense circumstances.
At the beginning, the first part was to make a nature sanctuary. It was a way to protect the land, but some year along the way, Doug and Chris developed this idea of creating national parks. And our work took a really big shift then.
So this is where we got started. This is where we were living. And all of this section became Pumalin, from the border with Argentina all the way out to the Pacific Ocean. This is the first one. We bought 763,000 acres, and it increased from there. None of this is ever done in a vacuum. We go out immediately and talk to everybody, mayors, everybody involved. So there's a lot of suspicion. Many times there's a lot of pushback.
We're coming to talk to the mayor here. We want to explain to her what the idea is of donating this land that's out in her district. We think that she'll be supportive of this. She understands about conservation.
La creación de este parque nacional a partir de Cabo León más la reserva.
Hay que decir que es un parque nacional. Que lo nacional, parques nacionales crean su propio polo.
In this area, this is all temperate rainforest. It's impenetrable. So the opposition was largely from the federal government at this point. This is where 5 years of serious political and social conflict took place.
What is it you don't like about Douglas Tompkins' project?
They don't want any progress. We are a poor country. We need the progress to put more higher our standard.
We were coming from a dictatorship in the country for 20 years, so there was a hardcore right-wing politicians that wouldn't understand the philanthropy.
Chile is a country that has good reason to be suspect of Americans. In 1973, the Nixon administration supported the coup that began 17 years of brutal dictatorship under General Augusto Pinochet. Yet when the Tompkins began assembling cheap wilderness land for conservation here, they were stunned to be labeled ugly Americans.
To be fair, at the same time, Chile is a very long and very thin country, and Doug and Chris were buying a lot of land, which amounted to a good chunk of one of Chile's regions.
The main concern of the military and the Navy was having Mr. Tompkins owning such an amount of foreign land that went from the border to the ocean, who was accused of cutting the country into pieces.
The right wing in Chile was going through the roof trying to figure out ways to deal with this.
March 13th, 1995. Virtually every newspaper around Chile and all television stations covering us last night and again this morning. Heavy attacks from the ultra-right wing and the salmon industry. We were taking up the fight against commercial salmon farming.
These are fish farms. These are the equivalent of hog farms. If you go down the ocean floor, you'll see underneath these cages here a dead sea. Marine ecology has been smothered. Nothing's living under these cages.
The sea lions would go towards the cages to eat, so we used to find sea lions dead with gunshots on the beach.
Doug put a wanted dead or alive. We'll give anyone $2,500 that leads to the guy who's killing the sea lions. And that was just gas on a fire. April 21st, 1995. More attacks in the newspaper against Doug and me. It's beginning to seem a clear threat to our life here. October 17th. Phone's tapped for sure now. New allegations against us coming from the military. Wondering what will fall next. Worried for Doug's safety.
They had to hide out in the American Embassy for a while. They had death threats. The FBI told us, my wife and I, that our phone was tapped. We were friends of the Tompkins.
El gobierno no lo hostiga, no lo hostiliza.
Habían muchas suspicacias. Se señalaba de que primero podía ser adquisición de tierras baratas para posteriormente hacer una venta a precios mayores. Entonces, el imaginario colectivo da para muchas cosas.
At that time, I was minister, and I was studying defense issues. And the military had all kinds of theories that this was Israel who was trying to take part of Chile, etc., etc.
We were accused of creating a new nuclear waste site for the United States, a new Jewish state, even though we were raised as Anglicans, a new base for the Argentine military to come in and finish Chile off once and for all. A really good one was that we were going to take all the cattle out of southern Chile and replace it with American bison.
Between the two of you, with all your projects in Chile and Argentina, how many acres are we talking?
2 million.
2 million?
Yeah. Just under 2 million.
That's an awful lot of acres.
It's peanuts. If you weigh it against what's being saved on an annual basis versus what's being destroyed, we're on the losing team. We're losing wilderness at the rate of 40 million acres a year. At this rate, we'll lose all wilderness within the next 50 years. People can say, oh, the Tompkins have protected over 2 million acres of land. And it is a lot of land, but it's a drop in the bucket compared to what's taking place every day, whether it's in the forests of Indonesia or the grasslands in Eastern Africa. Wherever it is, it's not as though we're gaining ground. We're just trying to hold back the onslaught. We're at this perfect storm of a rising human population base, rise in consumption, and a fall in natural resources. And yet, anybody who could really change some of that, they're unwilling to, because the cultural impact of those changes is just too much for them to consider. When we tried to create Corcovado Park, we ran straight into the military. A lot of what would eventually become the park was owned by the military, and they were using the area as a bombing range. Doug was meeting with the generals to try to convince them to preserve this place and stop the bombing. Before we go to the government to make an offer, we're completely prepared, saying, this is what we have invested in the land. We said to the government, we'll donate our park with all the infrastructure if you match one of our acres with up to 9 acres of unused federal land. That leveraging allows us to do something much greater than what would have been possible for us to do by ourselves. Patagonia Park was another very contentious project. We bought several thousand acres in Argentina, and then we bought an old estancia and 200,000 acres in Chile. We had an idea that this park could eventually go across the border to Argentina to protect a couple of million acres in total. In the case of the nearby communities, it was, by and large, a ranching story. And some people were upset that we would be taking one of the largest ranches in Chile out of production. And when we got to Iberá, it was incredibly challenging.
Some residents say that they've been displaced and then ignored by the people they sometimes refer to as eco-barons.
Nosotros no creemos de que Tompkins sea un multimillonario que se convirtió de pronto en un filántropo.
There were also disputes about land deeds and titles around Pumalín.
En el 1 o 2%, que son aproximadamente en aquella época del orden de 200 familias, que ellos sentían que su permanencia en la zona estaba siendo, entre comillas, amenazada.
We spent 5 years going out and getting everyone their land titles so that they would be comfortable, so there could be no question about what's yours and what belongs to the park.
I'll say that we're as good as anybody in the country about how we have dealt with land disputes.
Is that the one that hurts the most?
That's the one that hurts the most, because it's been just the absolute opposite.
It wasn't only individuals and some politicians who were opposed, but there were some institutions as well.
Opposition to the Tompkins is being fomented by none other than the Catholic Church.
This is the missing link of Pumalín Park, 30,000 hectares of land owned by the Catholic Church, known as Winai. Douglas Tompkins came this close to getting Winai.
What happened was pressure was put on the Catholic University not to sell to us, and they sold to the power company, to Endesa, the big power monopoly.
That would seem a pretty spiteful thing to do.
Well, it was. It was.
Okay, but property down on Lago General Carreras, are we buying them?
Yeah.
They have to have a lot of faith on what they were doing. 98% of the people would have simply given up and said, impossible to live in your country. Because we behaved, Chileans, very badly.
February 25th. Every day more news to bear. Doug completely overpowered with anger and frustration, and my nerves are frayed. Why are we doing this? I go home to serious confrontation. A lot of crying, honesty, and a loving response.
estoy pensando si puede rellenar todo esto, pero no quiero algo muy derecho. Ahí, mira la curva para tener un efecto natural. I believe in public access. We have to build public access infrastructures. You have visitor centers, you have campgrounds, even hotels, parking areas, trails, trailheads, offices for administration, signage. You've got all that kind of stuff that goes into making up a national park.
He was such a perfectionist. When he ran a spree, he had a little sign above his desk that said, you know, no detail is small.
Doug estaba seguro de que un mundo sin belleza no valía la pena.
You have to remember that for Doug, these are canvases. What he did do is he created a dogged, relentless pursuit of beauty.
Tractorista como artista. Ustedes pueden pintar el paisaje con el tractor, pero tienen que tener una buena técnica. Hay que meter las líneas, porque luego vamos a sacar una foto y ver
desde arriba
la obra.
When we first began to work in Chile and Argentina, we thought we were just protecting vast territories. But in fact, it's like they say, landscape without wildlife is just scenery. Everything changed when we got to Iberá. We realized that a lot of species were missing, from jaguars all the way down. We were no longer in the business of making national parks. We were in the business of creating fully functioning ecosystems. Time to rewild. Simply put, rewilding is bringing back the species that belong in a place but have been lost for whatever reason. Poaching, hunting, grazing of livestock.
Each species plays a major role in the ecosystem, so that guanacos are in large numbers to provide food for pumas. Pumas are predating over guanacos and are providing food for scavengers. It's not the merely recovery of a single species, it's the interactions. The rewilding program has our park wardens. Many of them are former gauchos, but today they are monitoring pumas.
Arcilio was the son of the chief puma hunter. So he would go out with his father, and they were paid a salary, but they were paid a bonus for every skin they brought back. ¿Qué pensaría tu padre si podría verte ahora con todo ese manejo, con tanto
puma
con tantos pumas
y no matar ninguno?
Y no matar ninguno.
¿Cierto?
No, es un cambio.
Claro, un cambio muy grande.
Es una vuelta.
Para mí es un cambio grande.
From an ethical standpoint, we have to serve biodiversity as a principle. We have to share the planet with other creatures. That means we have to make habitat available for evolution to continue to unfold. We're squeezing out creatures from their habitat by overexpanding. It's a self-defeating development. And that's what we find is pathological, that we're continuing to expand and expand and expand until the inevitable collapse.
February 18th. Lolo, why did we never climb our mountain together? It's such a gift to be up here and see all of this through your eyes.
Doug made the first ascent, and
You know, traditionally when you make the first ascent of a mountain, you get to name it. And Doug named it after Chris.
That was a great push. Yes, that was huge.
Sarah Christine is the highest point in the park and sort of the crown jewel.
You know, you can't do a better Valentine's present than that for your wife.
Yeah, he was always doing stuff like that for me.
No, they were intense, but they were totally deep in love, you could tell. He was always taking care of her, and likewise.
I mean, you would see them together, and it was like teenage kids, you know, like off in the corner canoodling. It was all about love.
I think virtually every day, he would send her these messages. They were photo messages.
They had their nicknames for each other, and she was Birdie.
I can recall vividly a really lovely DVD he made.
The love of my life is a world-class woman for all seasons. She's so beautiful at 60. You are my number one and only.
That's a secret side of Doug I never saw, but...
There it is. It's quite a peak, huh?
It is. I'm so happy to be right here.
Jimmy and I were here before. We were here 12 years ago with Yvonne and Doug.
That's another one for us.
First Medicaid ascent.
Can't beat it. I remember having an incredible sunset, just like the one we had last night. And I was thinking about Doug.
Now it's my biological clock ticking. I really feel it.
You got a lot of jobs you got to finish.
I got projects that are long-term projects, and you know, you're thinking, you know, I'm gonna make it to finish that. I'm really interested to see if we could finish this or finish that. And it takes a lot of time. Time is everything.
Yeah.
That's the most valuable.
Always is.
Life flies by.
Yeah.
I had talked Doug into going on this trip, well, at first, and then he became enthusiastic about it.
We thought it'd be fun to do a sea kayak trip of this big lake, not far from the Patagonia National Park.
We took them all to the lake, and they spent hours getting all their boats ready. Oh, honey.
They were world-class kayakers, but they hired somebody to put the trip together.
They took the Zodiac out and then put their boats in the water.
Doug and I were in a double kayak. Yvonne and Weston were in singles, and Jib and Lorenzo were in another double. The fourth day, the wind really started to come up.
The wind was blowing 8-foot waves every which direction.
We were having trouble with the rudder of this boat that we had borrowed. It was really getting increasingly difficult for Doug and me to keep our boat pointed downwind. This wave hit us. All of a sudden, we were upside down. And so I said to Doug, God, I wonder if we should try to swim for it. because if we get out in the middle of the lake, we're dead for sure. And then we both said, okay, let's try and go for it. I thought, I probably got 10 minutes left. You can only stay alive in water that cold for a half hour maybe. And then another wave broke over me and I realized I was starting to drown. And then something snapped. And I screamed, no. And I started swimming as hard as I could. And in a minute, Jib and Lorenzo arrived in their double kayak. And I grabbed onto the back and they started towing me.
I just happened to arrive to Doug first. He grabbed onto the back of my kayak and I got the kayak, turned towards shore and began to paddle. He was not panicking, he was kicking. He could have so easily grabbed onto me and flipped me over. But there was no way to fight the hypothermia that was starting to set in, and I could really feel that as he was losing strength to kick and hold on. In the final moment, Doug was looking up the Aviano Valley and just humming almost to himself. When he lost the strength to hold on anymore to the boat, I needed to get him up in my arm, keep his head out of the water. I couldn't hold him and hold the paddle, and I lost my paddle at that point. Doug and I floated like that for about an hour and a half. And then I heard a helicopter coming. They pulled us floating in the water to shore, and they went from there to the hospital.
Broken messages coming in slowly. Finally, it is Doug, Rick, helicopter. I know you're in serious trouble. Instinctively, I know without knowing. Outside, pleading with the gods. Please, 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 bring him back to me.
And they took us to the lodge where the phone rang and the lodge owner answered. And a short minute later, hung up and looked at us and said, now Doug is really dead.
Rush into the room where I now know they worked on you for hours. Cold body, soft. I crawl up onto your bed and lay next to you. I only wanted the two of us to be cocooned together and let everything and everyone else just slip away.
And I just stared into my soup. And I remember Yvonne staring into his soup. And then he picked up a spoon and started eating it very slowly. And then he looked over at me and he said, eat your soup, it's really good. And I made sure that I respected every spoonful of warm soup going down my throat.
And then we flew him the next day, and I was in the back with the coffin, and I had a knife in my bag, and I started carving our names. I didn't notice, but as I'm carving these big letters, and I'm just carving as hard as I can, I'm cutting myself. There's blood on the box, there's blood on me. And I was out of my seatbelt. I just was so intent on getting Birdie and Lolo into that box. So finally Rick, who's sitting way up by the pilot, comes back there, said, you sit down, you get in your seat, you put your seatbelt, and give me that knife. You are done. Is this what you want people to see? when we land.
She was off the deep end. You know, to the point where she didn't want to live. She didn't want to go through life without him.
Doug murió hace 3 días con sus mejores amigos, con Yvonne Chouinard, que es su amigo de toda su vida, con Rick Ridgway, que también casi murió, y con Weston Boyles, el chiquitito del grupo que quedó con Doug. Hasta el último momento nunca lo dejó solo. Y para esto yo estoy muy agradecido por el resto de mi vida. Vivió una vida de muchos siglos esta persona, Douglas. No sé, no puedo imaginar una vida sin él, pero aquí estamos. Thank you for coming.
We lowered Doug's casket into the grave. And then all the people who had come, all the citizens from surrounding towns, hundreds of people, we all started tossing dirt on his casket with our hands.
It took me a long time to decide not to go with him. It's a good place to come. I was so crazy for so long after he died. Every day. May 17th. When you left Esprit, you went on a grand search for what could be next. The grand gesture to live a new life. And now I'm sitting on that same precipice. Somehow, there has to be a new story. Perhaps this is the point, Bertie. It's time to write it all down. Even though I feel still that it was an amputation, not just a loss, I feel this big, audacious vision of Doug's was the thing that probably kept me in one piece. That was like a life raft for me. We never stopped. I managed everything.
All these things that she knew that were unsustainable, she stopped all that. And she pulled herself up and took over.
All the farms are gone. We had 13 farms at one point. We couldn't make them self-sustaining. It was just too expensive. I couldn't help but feel that I was failing Doug. It wasn't an option to keep them going, but it was tough to let them go. It became so black and white to me. There was no question. It was binary. My whole life became binary. I want to die, I'm going to live. We're going to do this, we're not going to do that. Doug wanted to do this, we're not doing it. Close it down. Pumalin, you're done. Balchak, you're almost done. Iwara, we're going to do this. We're going to go twice the speed, twice the scope. Just go. We have nothing to lose. That was my mantra. I have nothing to lose. The worst thing that could happen to me happened.
She was into a complete new phase in her life, and little by little, Chris not only found that reason to keep going, but she became more and more fierce and bold.
I always felt like a pebble in a stream. Not anymore. I know exactly what I want to do. I'm really living with a lot of intention. Entonces, el parque nuevo sería 2.3 million. 2.3 millones de acres.
Es otro Pumalino Corcovado.
20 millones de acres. Now we're talking.
She's inevitably had to ask herself, what's next?
Do you see any?
I think that the most energizing opportunity is rewilding.
So these are two of the first group that was released.
Yeah.
But they interact with the others that are wild.
Oh.
So
Yeah,
they
I
are
know.
doing much better outside than in the pen.
There was so much more to do than just protect the land. You can't call any of these places restored or healthy until everybody's back.
Chris helped with the reintroductions of over a dozen species at this point, ultimately including the jaguar, which nobody's ever done before.
It was Doug's idea to do whatever we could to bring jaguars back. The jaguar is emblematic. It's at the top of the food chain there. It was one of his dreams. So we have 9 to release, and that's assuming that both the cubs, who are now both females,
Yes.
have 2 cubs, maybe 1.
Yeah.
No, es increíble. Cada vez cuando yo pienso en eso, casi lloro. Really and truly.
Maybe national parks are like petri dishes. And when everything goes to hell, national parks, big protected areas, might be a petri dish in which evolution can kind of restart itself. Who knows?
Helping to protect biodiversity, as Chris is doing, actually has a direct link to climate change, and through that link to the survivability of our species on this planet.
March 2nd, 2017. The government sent up a smoke signal today. We will sign the agreement here on March 15th. At first, enormous relief, and then momentary happiness that gave way to my unending admiration for you. I asked myself, how can I come this far without you? But then I remembered, you've been here all along.
You know, when you devote not only a lot of your wealth, but a lot of your life, and then you choose to be buried in that place, you know, it made it impossible for someone to say, oh, he's just visiting.
There was this outpouring of grief for a widow across the entire country. It galvanized everybody. And any opposition to what they were trying to do seemed to vaporize.
Take care of your shirts for you. Yep.
Histórico. Es histórico. En serio. Nunca nadie ha hecho este antes.
When I was president, We met with Christine and we decided that this could be an interesting thing that two women could continue pushing what Doug had as a real important dream.
But the truth is, we needed to finish up these parks. You have to remember that we were carrying untold overhead. In the last year or so, we've been spending up to $6 million a year. So not donating them would be economic disaster eventually.
Ay, ay, ay. Egon. Hola.
Oye, están todos los carpinteros emblemáticos instalando el letrero. Oye, chico.
It was so audacious and so unlikely that you could pull that off. All 5 new national parks at once and the enlargement of 3 others. But I just felt like it's now or never. This is the moment. This is a hell of a team. And there are hundreds of people involved. We want the government to keep them on, but who knows what will happen. Some of them we'll see again, some of them we won't. But it's a lot of people coming to the end of something.
Somos una familia de 25 años y tenemos un honor y amor entre nosotros. En el nombre de todos nosotros, brindimos a Douglas y Pablo Carrasco.
The weekend before the president arrived for the ceremony, I read something and I saw immediately 2 words that were conditional. We could, we would, not we are, that told me that one of the parks, and the biggest one in this collection of 8, wasn't completely clear if it was a go. And for me, it was all or nothing. We do them all or we do nothing. So it's huge risk if it doesn't go through.
After all what happened to them, also those years trying to convince different governments to do something like this and never being able to go forward, that I guess, of course, she had to have doubts. She thought anything can change.
Right up to the hour before the ceremony, I had no idea whether it was going to go or not. That's it. Let's roll. When she arrived, I was really stone-faced.
We meet again.
And she wanted to meet at Doug's grave in the little cemetery there. She was acknowledging Doug's grave and talking about Doug, and I just thought, I'm about to pull the plug on all of this work. I had 2 speeches. One, wrath and brimstone if somehow something had gone awry, and another one that was congratulatory.
La década de los 90, cuando don Douglas Tompkins.
And then someone came around next to me and she said, it's in there. It's okay. So I turned around to the president and said, God, what a historic day.
Dame tus manos sin temor, verás tu vientre madurar, crecer en flor, verás verás tu hija sonreír. Bajo la
Yo tengo un mapa de un lugar de solo los dioses podrían imaginar. Lo que para Doug en 1992 será el Parque Nacional Pumalín. Estos parques les pertenecen. Protéjanlos con todo su corazón. Elija la vida, elija la belleza. Lola, we made it! Oh my God, you guys.
He was somebody I kind of mentored and a good friend, and standing there with the president of Chile, signing these papers to create these parks, and geez. Yeah, I had tears coming down. It was a pretty proud moment.
That's why it's the biggest in the world. You should be so proud.
They created the largest land donation in the history of mankind. Doug was setting the bar really high, but he would be proud if somebody tried to outdo him. Bigger parks, more conservation.
Oh my God! Look at him. Look, 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 look. It's a condor.
Look at this incredible wildness that she and Doug protected. As far as you can see.
It's changed the whole attitude about conservation in Latin America. People want to establish these parks now. So now I'm involved in starting a new park down in the tip of Tierra del Fuego, 750,000 acres. I came up with this idea and I gave it to Chris's organization. We're calling it End of the World Park. I mean, you know, here Doug was ragging on me that I should be doing the same thing he was doing. So now I'm starting to do it.
I was always the sweet one to the two of you. I was easier to accommodate and tougher to turn down. But, God, what a life.
Yeah. Yeah.
What a life.
would you do if it all came back to you? Each crest of each wave, bright as lightning. would you say if you had to leave today? Leave everything behind, even though for once you shine. Standing on higher ground, but when you hear the sounds, you realize it's just the wind. And you know it's it matters, pulling what you let under your skin. Put to the test, would you step back from a line of fire? Hold everything back, all emotions and desires. Convince yourself to be someone else and hide from the world your lack of confidence. What you choose to believe in, it takes your rise or your fall. It takes your rise or your fall. With no one else around you, no one to understand you, no one to hear your calls. Look through all your dark corners when you're backed up against a wall. Step back from a line of fire.